Hi everyone, and welcome to the next video in the Bobby Fischer series. The game I took from his 60 memorable games this time is a game he played at the Candidates Tournament in 1959, when he was just 16 and already a massive force to be reckoned with. His opponent was the greatest Serbian grandmaster of all time, Svetozar Gligoric. The game is entitled Something New, and Larry Evans gives the introduction as follows. During the mid-50s, Gligoric, Reshevsky and Neudorf were considered the strongest non-Soviet grandmasters. Within a few years, Fischer managed to surpass them. However, in doing so, he succeeded in beating Gligoric only once up until 1966. On the occasion of this first win, Fischer employs a novel attacking system, 13 Queen e2, against the dragon variation. Gligoric fails to react vigorously enough and makes the mistake of castling too soon, thereby exposing himself to the same type of sacrificial combination that demolished Bent Larsen in a similar game the year before. Fischer had the white pieces and opened as normal with e4, and Gligoric went into the Sicilian with c5. And play continued along the main line. Knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, d6, and bishop c4, which is the bishop development that Fischer used almost exclusively against the Sicilian, so much so that it has become known as the Fischer-Sozin attack. The game went on bishop d7 and bishop b3. And now g6, which is going into the dragon variation, which is rarely seen at top level these days, thanks in no small part to Fischer's efforts against it, including this particular game. As I said before, his opening preparation was second to none, and in my 60 memorable games, he gives lots of advice with various possible moves in the opening. For example, instead of playing bishop b3 on the last move, there's bishop e3, and the way that he says for black to deal with that is with knight g4, which is just plain irritating, hassling the bishop here on e3. Alternatively, there's bishop g5, where one line goes e6 and bishop takes f6. He gives examples of what not to play as well. This is a mistake, although it looks like a good move. Because it's giving black the bishop pair, but apparently it should double his f-pawns, because it looks as though black has to recapture with the g-pawn here, because if queen takes f6, now there's knight db5 threatening knight c7 check and the d6 pawn, and if knight c7 check is going to win the rook. So this would be an easy trap for an inexperienced player to fall into, but it's easy for black to get out of this because he can just castle now. And after knight d6 check, knight takes d6 check, king b8, and now black is well ahead thanks to the rook here at d8, which is can discover an attack on the queen if this knight ever moves. And if white plays knight db5, now comes a6, effectively winning a piece. If knight a3, bishop takes a3. There's no b takes a3 because the queen takes c3 check, and it's game over at move 13. So she gives you an idea of the kind of traps and little nuances about the openings that Fischer knew. So anyway, we'll go back to the game continuation. After bishop b3 came g6, so the dragon, and now f3 from Fischer, and he wrote here, the only other try for advantage is bishop e3, where one line goes knight g4, knight takes c6, and b takes c6. Not knight takes e3, because now comes a great tactical shot, bishop takes f7 check, where black's only move is to take the bishop with his king, and allowing white to capture black's queen with check, meaning that after rook takes d8 and f takes e3, white is clearly miles ahead. So it has to be b takes c6. But now comes queen f3, knight e5, and queen g3, with a small edge to white and a sharp middle game coming. So Fischer chose the alternative way to get an advantage with f3. And then play continued with knight a5, about which Fischer writes, releasing the central tension this way is wrong. Correct is playing instead knight takes d4. After queen takes d4, there's bishop g7, but he continues after bishop g5, white keeps in control. So you know, he's very, very good at keeping the small edge that white has at the start of the game and maintaining it in Sicilian structures like this game, and also in roue pairs like we've seen in other games. Yeah, that was one of his great skills. So knight a5. Anyway, so now he plays bishop g5. Not worried about losing the bishop pair, because it's more relevant that black's going to lose a lot of tempo if he just takes on b3 now. So bishop g7, queen d2, and h6, which he notes as a concession, i.e. the provocation of a weakness by white, pointing out they have black castles instead here. And bishop h6 followed up with h4 and h5 produces a strong and almost mechanical attack. It basically plays itself. He was famed for saying it's such a strong attack, this kind of system, that novice players can be grandmasters with it. It basically plays itself. So h6 is provoked from black. So now simply bishop e3, and it's impossible for black to castle without losing the pawn on h6, and he doesn't want to push it forward as it's weakening g5, and it's weakening, you know, where his king will be eventually. So he continued with a rook c8, and Fischer castled queenside, and then came knight c4 and queen e2, which is the key move of this game, and it was a totally new idea at the time. It allows black to capture what was considered then to be the more important of the white bishops, this bishop here on e3. And David Bronstein, the Ukrainian chess genius, was so impressed with this move that he gave it a double exclamation mark, claiming it was virtually the winning line. Alexander Kotov, the commissar of chess criticism in the Soviet Union at the time, wrote with more sober restraint, "It's difficult to agree with this." The point is that black can't defend the knight any further, the knight here on c4. So he's obliged to either lose more time by moving it or to take on e3, when although he will win the bishop pair, he will be 2 tempi behind. And mainline up until this game, instead of queen e2, have been bishop takes c4. And after rook takes c4, g4, which is also good for white. There's a good attack coming here, but black has good counterplay as well. And you know, one of the advantages of playing these novel moves like queen e2 is that it forces your opponents to play over the board with bishop takes c4, rook takes c4. You know, the theory carrying on from that position would have been well known at the time, and is probably still well known now and used even now. But yeah, this idea with queen e2, you know, it forces Gligoric to think over the board. And oops, hold on now. And he answered after queen e2 with knight takes e3. So then came queen takes e3, of course, and now Gligoric castles into a dangerous attack. Fischer gives the alternative queen b6 with the strong threat of e5, exploiting the pin on this knight here, which was played against him by Marini at the Mar del Plata tournament in 1960, which he says is better than Gligoric's immediate castling. One line goes queen d2, queen c5, f4, and h5. This is what Marini played, but Fischer didn't like this h5 move. He thought it was questionable and thought better was b5 or simply castling. Because after h5 there's knight f3, and after bishop h6, e5, and now white has a powerful attack. So Gligoric castles into it. Okay, that's the end of part 1.